Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. In this video, I am going to start making the lesson itself, the grammar points, a little bit shorter and emphasize your reading comprehension at the end. That's because we've reviewed many of the things that you could really consider very, very central. And now we're going to start adding some things at the edges. Now, some of these edges do involve very common words, but they're also often fairly difficult concepts, so I want to take it a little bit easier. In this video, what I'll be looking at is the definite article, that is how you say the in Old Norse. Now, if you're coming at this from an English perspective, this sounds pretty easy. What's the word for the? Right? Because there's one word for the in English. No matter how many things you're counting, right? You say the stone, but also the stones. No matter the gender, we don't even use grammatical gender in English. No matter the case, which we also are pretty bereft of in modern English. In Old Norse, as you could expect, it's a little bit different. You have a different form for the depending on the number of what you're talking about, singular versus plural, depending on its gender, masculine, feminine, or neuter, and of course, depending on our old friend, case, nominative, accusative, genitive, dative. That means that you've got 24 forms of the word the, and it's not even a separate word. In Old Norse, the word the is a suffix that you add to the end of a word. So madr is man, person, madrin is the person. So the basic form, I guess you could say, although they're all equally basic in a sense, is the masculine nominative singular in, I-N-N. Now that is related to something in English. It's related to the English word yawn, as in those mountains yawn, right? It's a word for something that's being pointed at in the distance. Now in English, that's a pretty marginal word now, right? We have the same root, yawn, and we just don't do a whole lot with it. But in Old Norse, and by extension the later Scandinavian languages, it becomes the very central the word. All right, so what are its forms? Let's look at them as if they are a separate word, which very rarely it sometimes can be if you're using an adjective with it. But it'll be a little bit easier if we think of it as separate first. So let's look at the masculine. And as usual, I'll go in the order singular, plural, and nominative, accusative, genitive, dative. Here, our forms are in, ins, inu, nir, na, num, unum. Depends on how you're thinking about it. Feminine, in, inna, innar, inni, nar, na, num, unum. Neuter is it, ins, inu, in, na, num, unum. All right, so what you need to do is if you want to make a noun the whatever, you've got to add the appropriate form of this word the to the appropriate form of that word. So, for example, if we want to say, let's take our original example of a masculine noun, elder fire. Now, sometimes when I'm giving examples of these things, whether or not the is there, I'll use the in my English translation. Old Norse has slightly different rules for the placement of the. It's probably a little bit less of it than there is in English, but more or less the rules will be the same. So we know that if we want to talk about a fire in all its different forms, we're going to talk about elder, eld, elds, eldi, eldar, elda, elda, eldum. But if we want to talk about the fire in all of its forms, we're going to be talking about eldrin, eldin, eldsins, eldinum, eldarnir, eldana, eldana, and eldunum. Now, notice that you don't just take the normal dictionary nominative form of the noun and add all of the forms to it. You have to inflect the noun first and then inflect the article to go with it. So, to say the fire's flames as opposed to a fire's flames, you have to say else with it in the genitive and then ins with the article in the genitive too, elsins. This is a really common error that I see in early beginners where they want to inflect just the article and not the noun if they've got an article on the noun, but you got to inflect both. But they'll still be written together as one word in Old Norse, right? So the fire, eldrin, you're never going to see that. I guess I ought to never say never, but you're not going to see it as eldr and then in. It's eldrin. It becomes one word. Same thing with the feminine. Let's take our basic feminine example that we've been using, jorð, earth. So there, we know that our forms are jorð, jorð, jarðar, jorðu, jarðir, jarðir, jarða, jorðum. But with the article, the earth, we've got jorðin, jorðina, jarðarinnar, yes, it is that long, jorðuni, or jorðini if the U ending is used in the dative, jarðirnar, jarðirnar, jarðanna, and jorðunum. Then, let's take a neuter. Let's use water, since we've got these element examples. We know our forms are vatn, vatn, vatns, vatni, votn, votn, vatna, votn, votnum. But with the article, the water, we've got vatnit, vatnit, vatsns, vatnsins, vatsins, vatninu, votnin, votnin, vatnana, and votnunum. Now, a couple basic remarks about some things that can trip people up here. When the form of the noun ends in a vowel, you don't use the vowel, that letter I, at the beginning of the article form. So, eldrin, we're going to keep the I on in. But if we have a weak masculine noun, which we'll get to later, something like teamy, time, hour, which ends in a vowel, you're not going to add an extra I. It's going to be teemin. Same thing with weak feminines that end in the letter A. So you have jorðin, where you're going to use the I from the word the in. But if you've got a weak feminine noun, like kona, meaning woman, you're just going to add the in. You're not going to add a second vowel, so it's going to be konan. Now, hypothetically, the forms in the plural that I've given you ought to start with I's too, inir, inir, but you never actually see those I's emerge when they're suffixed to nouns, so I think it can be a little bit confusing to learn them that way at first. Another thing to keep in mind is that when you add that article in the plural, you get rid of the M at the end. Okay, let me restate this. When you got a dative plural noun and you want to add the dative plural definite article, you cut off the M at the end of the dative plural of the noun before you add the article. So you don't say votnum num, you say votnunum. Right? That's why I said how you want to represent in writing the ending of the article when it's alone is kind of depending on how you look at how that's sectioned up. But the M of the dative plural ending is going to drop. So votnum, e votnum in waters, e votnunum in the waters. Another thing to note is that even though some of these definite article endings have the letter U in them, they don't cause you umlaut. So you may have noticed that, for example, the dative singular of water is with the article is vatninu. That does not become votninu, though I admire you for perhaps wondering if it does, because the article is still apparently at the stage where it's becoming part of the word that it's attached to. It's still not quite considered enough the same word for the U to creep forward and cause U mutation, so you don't have to worry about that. It does not cause mutation. It's still sort of somewhere in the back of an Old Norse speaker's mind a different word, so it doesn't cause that like a U in the same word would. All right. So just to make sure that you're following along, let's give you a few different nouns and different genders and see if you can correctly give them all of their definite article endings. And as usual, I'll just give you a question here. You can pause the video while you think about it, and then I'll show you the answers on the screen. So see if you can do vindr, wind, something I'm dealing with right now. Vindr, all of its forms with the definite article, the wind. All right, let's see how you did. Correct forms are vindrin, vindin, vinsins, vindinum, vindarnir, vindana, vindanna, and vindunum. Notice you're actually quite correct if you notice that the masculine and feminine plural endings are in a sense reversed in the definite article from what they are in the actual nouns. You might expect that in masculine you would have like vindarnar, and then in feminine you would have like yardir near. You would expect the ear to go with ear and the r to go with r, but it's reversed, right? It's vindarnir and yardirnar for complicated historical reasons that don't bear much on you actually learning how to read the language. All right, let's see if you can try another feminine. See what you can do with the good old feminine noun veruld, world, in all of its forms with the definite article the. All right, let's see how you did. The correct forms are veruldin, veruldina, veraldarinar. Yes, it is that long, you're not incorrect. Verulduni or veruldini, depending on whether you're using the dative ending on the noun or not. Veraldirnar, and then again veraldirnar. Typically in feminines, the nominative and accusative plural are the same. Veraldana, veruldunum. How'd you do? All right, now see what you can do with a neuter noun. See what you can do with skip, ship. What would all the forms of skip, ship be with the definite article the? All right, how did you do? The correct forms are skipit, skipit, skipsins, skipinum, skipping, skipping, skipana, skipunum. All right. Now, as I said, there's a more or less consistent pattern between English and Old Norse of where the word the will be used, right? If we're talking about a man, a tree, a mountain, we're just going to use the normal forms that we've already learned. There's no word for a or an in Old Norse. But if we want to specify what we're talking about, right, because somebody already knows which man, which mountain, which tree we're talking about, we're going to call it the man, the mountain, the tree. And that's when these forms with in, or whatever the appropriate form is with the number, case, and gender is, come forth. This is very important to learn. Luckily, the definite article endings are very similar to the adjective endings, which we will later see. And I'll wrap this up with some readings. And for now, from beautiful Wyoming, I'll wish you all the best.